Rain streaks the tarmac at a sleek Los Angeles private jet terminal as Nia Jackson steps off a Skylux jet, her crimson suit pristine, heels clicking with purpose. Airport security swarms, slapping cold handcuffs on her wrists, dragging her off, without a word. Tara Hensley, a smug flight attendant, smirks from the jet door, assuming Nia's a fraud who conned her way aboard. This arrest isn't the end. It's the ignition of a brutal reckoning. What sparked this chaos? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice-smashing arrogance, hit like, subscribe, and join the ride for more epic showdowns. Hours before the rain-soaked arrest on that Los Angeles tarmac, Nia Jackson stood tall in a private hangar, the golden California sun glinting off the sleek Skylux jet waiting to whisk its elite passengers across the Pacific. She adjusted the lapels of her crimson suit, a tailored masterpiece that hugged her frame like a second skin, exuding quiet power as she strode toward the boarding ramp. Her leather briefcase swung lightly in her grip, her heels striking the polished concrete, with a rhythm that demanded attention. Around her, the hangar buzzed with the privileged few. Oil tycoons in bespoke blazers, a pop star with oversized sunglasses, a tech mogul clutching a tablet streaming stock tickers. Nia's VIP pass dangled from her fingers, a golden ticket to the exclusive world above the clouds earned through years of grit and brilliance. She reached the boarding agent, a wiry man with a clipboard, and handed over her pass with a calm smile. He scanned it, nodded, then waved her toward the jet's stairs. So far, so smooth. But as she ascended, a shadow loomed at the top. Tara Hensley, the lead flight attendant, her bleach blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her uniform crisp, but her eyes sharp with something sour. Nia stepped aboard, and Tara's gaze raked over her, lingering on the crimson suit, the confident posture, the black skin that didn't fit her unspoken script of who belonged here. Tara's lips twitched into a smile, thin and practiced, as she took Nia's pass. She scanned it with a handheld device, the beep confirming its authenticity. But then she froze, her head tilted, her brow furrowed, and she turned the pass over in her hands as if it were a counterfeit dollar bill. "This can't be right," she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the hangar's hum, slicing into the chatter of the boarding passengers below. Heads turned. The oil tycoon with his cigar paused mid-puff. The pop star peeked over her shades. The tech mogul's fingers stilled on his screen. Tara held the pass up, squinting at it like a detective inspecting a clue, then looked at Nia with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Are you sure this is yours? Looks like it might belong to someone else." The implication hung heavy. Nia had stolen it, scammed her way into this rarefied air. A ripple of snickers spread through the crowd still filing up the stairs, a low murmur of amusement from people who'd never had to prove their place. Nia's chest tightened, but she kept her face smooth, her voice steady. "It's mine. Scan it again if you need to." Tara did, the beep echoing once more, undeniable proof. But she didn't hand it back. Instead, she stepped closer, her heels clicking on the jet's threshold, and leaned in, her tone dripping with mock confusion. Funny how these things get mixed up sometimes. You'd think they'd be more careful about who gets one. The words landed like a slap, and the snickers grew louder, a chorus of entitlement ringing in Nia's ears. She opened her mouth to respond, but Tara spun away, bustling toward the galley with a tray of coffee cups balanced in her hands, her movements sharp and deliberate. Nia followed, stepping into the jet's plush interior, the scent of leather and champagne greeting her as she navigated the narrow aisle. Tara brushed past, her elbow jutting out just enough to jostle Nia's arm, and then it happened. A scalding splash of dark roast hit Nia's suit, soaking the crimson fabric across her chest. The cup clattered to the floor, brown liquid pooling at her feet, and Tara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a parody of shock. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. These trays are so tricky to balance." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes gleamed with triumph, a predator savoring the first bite. "Bidio." Passengers nearby erupted, not in concern but in laughter, a harsh barking sound that bounced off the cabin walls. A woman in pearls clutched her stomach, wheezing, "Clumsy hands, huh?" While a man with a Rolex leaned forward, grinning. "Guess that's one way to make a statement." Nia stood there, coffee dripping down her blazer, the heat seeping into her skin, but she didn't flinch. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a silk scarf, and began blotting the stain with slow, deliberate strokes, her movements a silent rebuke to the chaos around her. Tara hovered, watching, her apology morphing into a smirk as she bent to retrieve the cup, muttering under her breath, "Should have watched where you were going." The insult was soft, a whisper meant for Nia alone, but it carried the weight of a shout. Nia's fingers paused on the scarf, her pulse quickening, a familiar ember of rage flickering deep inside. She'd faced this before, the sideways glances, the assumptions, the casual cruelty dressed up as mistakes. She folded the scarf, tucked it away, and met Tara's gaze with a look that could have cut glass. "Next time, I'll dodge better," she said, her tone cool, edged with steel. Tara blinked, caught off guard by the calm defiance, but recovered fast, tossing her hair as she strutted back to the galley, leaving Nia to face the staring crowd alone. The oil tycoon puffed his cigar, exhaling a cloud that curled toward the ceiling, and muttered, "Some people just don't know their place." The pop star giggled, snapping a photo of Nia's stained suit, her thumbs already flying across her phone screen. Nia slid into her seat, second row from the front, the leather creaking under her weight, and fastened her belt with a click that felt like locking armor into place. She'd shrugged off worse than this, she told herself. A spilled coffee and a few cheap shots weren't enough to rattle her. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the jet engines drown out the lingering chuckles. This was just the beginning of the flight, a minor skirmish in a war she'd fought 1,000 times. She'd dealt with gatekeepers like Tara before, petty tyrants who wielded their little kingdoms like scepters, and she'd always come out on top. The stain would dry, the laughter would fade, and she'd land in Los Angeles with her dignity intact. That's what she believed anyway, as the jet taxied toward the runway, its engines roaring to life. She didn't see Tara slip into the galley, didn't hear the hushed exchange with a colleague as the attendant's lips curled into a sneer. "She doesn't belong here," Tara said, her voice low but venomous, carrying just far enough to reach the ears of the man in the Rolex, who nodded in silent agreement. Nia didn't catch the words, didn't notice the way Tara's fingers tightened around a fresh tray, her mind already spinning with the next move. The jet lifted off, slicing through the sky, and Nia settled in, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her. She thought she'd weathered the worst of it, that she'd shut down Tara's game with a cool head and a steady hand. But Tara wasn't done, not by a long shot. The coffee was just the opening salvo, a petty jab to test the waters. Nia's composure, her refusal to crack, had lit a fuse in Tara's chest. And now the flight attendant was plotting something sharper, something that would hit harder than a spilled drink. The cabin lights flickered as the plane climbed higher, and Nia let out a slow breath, her fingers brushing the damp spot on her suit. She'd handled it, she thought. She'd kept her cool, turned the tables, made Tara look small. But the air around her was thickening, the whispers growing bolder, and Tara's footsteps echoed back from the galley with a purpose that Nia couldn't yet fathom. This wasn't over. It was only the first slight, a spark that would ignite a firestorm she couldn't see coming, one that would burn through the flight and beyond, leaving scars she'd carry long after the wheels touched down. The jet soared into the night, and Tara's smirk widened in the shadows, her next move already taking shape. The Skylux jet sliced through the night sky over the Pacific, its cabin awash in the soft glow of recessed lights, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and crisp champagne. Nia Jackson settled into her seat, second row from the front, the damp spot on her crimson suit now a faint shadow against the fabric, a reminder of Tara Hensley's opening shot back at the hangar. She adjusted her posture, spine straight, hands resting lightly on her lap, determined to reclaim the luxury she'd earned, to let the hum of the engines wash away the sting of that public shaming. Around her, the elite passengers buzzed with their own worlds. The oil tycoon puffed his cigar in the back, the pop star scrolled her phone with manicured nails, and Victor Grayson, a silver-haired real estate mogul in a pinstripe suit, lounged across the aisle, his polished loafers glinting under the dim light. Nia exhaled, letting the tension from Tara's coffee stunt bleed out. expecting the flight to shift into the seamless indulgence promised by Skylux's glossy ads. She was wrong. Tara emerged from the galley, her bleach blonde bun catching the light like a beacon, a silver tray balanced in her hands loaded with crystal flutes of bubbling champagne. She moved down the aisle with a dancer's grace, her smile wide and warm, a stark contrast to the venom she'd spat at Nia earlier. She stopped at the oil tycoon first, offering a glass with a lilting, "Something to unwind, sir?" He grunted, approval, taking it without a glance. Next, the pop star, who giggled as Tara leaned in, whispering, "Only the best for you," before handing over a flute with a flourish. Victor got the full treatment. Tara bent low, her voice syrupy as she purred, "A vintage just for you, Mr. Grayson," and placed the glass in his hand with a lingering touch. The cabin filled with the delicate clink of crystal, the faint fizz of bubbles, a symphony of privilege that wrapped everyone in its embrace. Everyone except Nia. Tara glided past her seat, her eyes sliding over Nia as if she were a ghost, her tray conveniently angled away. Nia's brow furrowed, but she waited, assuming it was an oversight. Minutes ticked by, the chatter grew louder, and Tara circled back with a basket of warm, lavender-scented towels, doling them out with the same exaggerated charm. She draped one over the tech mogul's hands, cooing, "Keeps the stress at bay," and tucked another into the pop star's lap with a wink. Victor got a towel folded into a perfect square, Tara's fingers brushing his as she murmured, "Can't have you uncomfortable, sir." Nia's seat remained empty, her hands bare, the air around her growing colder with every pass Tara made. She cleared her throat, a small sound, and raised a finger as Tara swept by again. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice calm but firm. "Could I get a water?" Tara froze mid-step, her head snapping toward Nia like she'd been jolted awake. Her lips curled into a tight, brittle smile, and she tilted her head, studying Nia with a look that hovered between pity and disdain. "Water?" she echoed, her tone sharp enough to cut. She turned to the galley, her heels clicking with exaggerated purpose, and returned moments later with a single plastic cup, the kind you'd find at a gas station, half filled with tepid water, no ice, no finesse. She dropped it onto Nia's tray table with a dull thud, the liquid sloshing over the rim, and muttered, "That's all we've got for you." The emphasis landed like a brick, a deliberate jab that stripped away any pretense of accident. Nia stared at the cup, the lukewarm puddle mocking her, a far cry from the crystal flutes glittering around her. Across the aisle, Victor let out a low, rumbling chuckle, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned back, swirling his champagne. "Guess some people expect too much," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. The oil tycoon snorted, the pop star smirked behind her glass, and a ripple of agreement hummed through the jet. A quiet pact among the privileged to keep Nia on the outside. Her jaw tightened, the ember of rage from the hangar flaring brighter, but she didn't lash out. She picked up the cup, her fingers steady, and took a slow sip, the flat taste coating her tongue as she locked eyes with Tara. The flight attendant stood there, arms crossed, her smirk widening as if daring Nia to complain. Nia didn't. She set the cup down, wiped her lips with the back of her hand, and leaned back, her posture a wall of defiance. She'd faced worse than this, she told herself. Boardroom snubs, whispered slurs, doors slammed in her face. A cheap cup of water and a rich man's laugh weren't going to break her. But the air in the cabin shifted, a subtle thickening, as Tara strutted back to the galley, her hips swaying with a victor's swagger. Nia's pulse thrummed, a quiet drumbeat of warning she couldn't quite place. She thought she'd weathered Tara's second strike, that she'd held her ground with dignity intact. What could Tara do next, after all? Spill more coffee? Ignore her again? Nia's lips twitched into a faint, bitter smile as she stared out the window at the endless black sea below, the jet's engines a steady roar in her ears. She was still in control, she thought, still the woman who'd clawed her way to this seat. But Victor's chuckle lingered, a dark thread weaving through the cabin's hum, and Tara's footsteps echoed with a purpose that Nia didn't yet see. What was Tara whispering to the junior attendant in the galley? Why did Victor's eyes keep flicking toward her with that glint of amusement? Nia didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a snub. It was a signal. A flare shot into the night sky, marking her as prey in a game she hadn't agreed to play. The champagne flutes clinked on, the towels warmed the hands of the chosen, and Nia sat alone, the plastic cup a silent taunt on her. Trey. She thought she'd won this round by staying calm, by refusing to crack. But Tara wasn't done escalating, and the next move would hit harder than Nia could imagine. Hey, what do you think? Did Nia handle Tara's pettiness like a champ? Or should she have called her out right then? Comment number 1 if you'd have clapped back at Tara. Number 2 if you'd have stayed cool like Nia. If you're raging at this injustice already, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stick around for the chaos ahead. Was Tara just testing Nia, or is something darker brewing behind that fake smile? What's Victor plotting with that smug grin? Drop your guesses below, and let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes in the next part. The Skylux jet hummed through the night, its cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, casting long shadows across the leather seats as it soared over the Pacific. Nia Jackson sat rigid in her second-row spot, the lukewarm water from Tara Hensley's earlier snub still sitting untouched on her tray table, a plastic insult amid the clinking crystal flutes around her. The sting of being skipped during service gnawed at her, a fresh layer of humiliation piled atop the coffee-soaked shaming back at the hangar. She'd kept her cool then, and she'd held it now, but the air felt heavier, the whispers sharper, the exclusion more pointed. Victor Grayson's chuckle still echoed in her ears, his "some people expect too much" barb a splinter under her skin, and Tara's smug strut to the galley had left a bitter taste no water could wash away. Enough was enough. Nia unbuckled her seatbelt, the click cutting through the cabin's low murmur, and rose to her feet, her crimson suit catching the light despite the faint coffee stain. She pulled her phone from her briefcase, thumbed it to record, and marched toward the galley, her heels striking the carpet with a steady, deliberate beat. The jet's elite passengers glanced up. The oil tycoon's cigar paused mid-air. The pop star's scrolling slowed, Victor's silver head tilted with a flicker of interest. Nia found Tara leaning against the galley counter, chatting with a junior attendant, a wiry kid with nervous eyes and a badge reading Kyle. Tara's bleach-blonde bun gleamed under the overhead light as she laughed, her voice a sharp trill, but it died when Nia stepped into view. "We need to talk," Nia said, her tone even but laced with steel, holding up her phone so the red recording dot glowed like a warning. Tara's smirk faltered, her arms uncrossing as she straightened, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice pitching higher, a note of fake innocence creeping in. Nia didn't blink. "You skipped me on service. Gave me a cup of warm tap water while everyone else got champagne and towels. Explain that." The words hung between them, a quiet challenge, and Kyle's eyes darted to the floor, his fingers twisting the hem of his apron. Tara recovered fast, her lips curling into a tight, practiced smile as she stepped closer, her hands clasping in front of her like a scolded schoolgirl. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her tone dripping with syrupy regret. "It was an honest mistake. We're stretched thin up here, and I must have missed you. Let me make it up to you right now." She turned to Kyle, snapping her fingers. "Get her a fresh towel, something nice." Kyle nodded, fumbling toward a cabinet, but Nia's gaze stayed locked on Tara, reading the lie in her two wide eyes, the twitch at the corner of her mouth. She kept recording, the phone steady, and nodded once. "Good. Let's keep it professional from here." Tara's smile held, but her jaw tightened, a flicker of fury buried beneath the act. Nia pocketed her phone, satisfied she'd drawn a line, and turned back to her seat, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She'd called Tara out, forced an apology, and put the crew on notice. A win, she thought, as she sank back into the leather, the faint squeak of the cushions small victory hymn, the cabin settled, the oil tycoon resuming his puffing, the pop star tapping away, Victor sipping his champagne with a bored shrug. Tara returned moments later, Kyle trailing her with a plush white towel folded into a neat rectangle, still warm, from the heater. She placed it on Nia's tray with exaggerated care, her fingers lingering as she murmured, "There you go. All better now." Nia took it. The lavender scent a stark upgrade from the plastic cup, and let herself believe she'd turned the tide. But as Tara walked away, her heels clicking softer now, Nia didn't see the glance she shot Kyle. A silent command that made his shoulders hunch. She didn't hear the low buzz of Tara's voice as she leaned into him back at the galley. Her words a venomous hiss. "We'll fix her." The jet droned on, the dim light cloaking the shift brewing behind Nia's back. She unfolded the towel, pressed it to her hands, and let the warmth seep in. A fleeting comfort that dulled the edge of the past hour's slights. She'd won this round, she told herself, her lips curving into a faint, defiant smile. Tara's apology, fake or not, was on record, a shield against whatever came next. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, the engine's rumble a steady pulse she could ride out. But then it happened. A sudden jolt rocked the cabin, a passenger's startled yelp cutting through the calm, and Nia's eyes snapped open. Her briefcase, stowed neatly beside her seat, toppled into the aisle with a loud thud, the latch springing open. Her laptop slid out, skittering across the carpet, papers fluttering like wounded birds. She lunged to grab it, her towel dropping, but not before Tara tripped nearby, her elbow clipping the bag as she passed, a move too smooth to be accidental. "Oops," Tara said, her voice a sing-song mockery as she kept walking, not looking back. Nia's pulse spiked, her fingers snatching the laptop before it hit a seat leg, but the damage was done. Victor Grayson leaned forward, his phone already out, snapping a photo of the mess. Nia crouched in the aisle, her crimson suit rumpled, papers strewn around her. He smirked, his thumbs flying across the screen as he muttered, "First class. Trash," loud enough for the oil tycoon to grunt in agreement. Nia scooped up her things, her movements swift and precise, shoving the laptop back into the bag, her face a mask of calm despite the heat flooding her chest. She'd seen Tara's elbow, felt the intent, but she couldn't prove it, not yet. She straightened, locking the briefcase with a sharp click, and slid back into her seat, her breath steadying. The passenger's stares lingered, a mix of amusement and disdain, but she ignored them, her mind racing. Tara's stumble wasn't a slip, it was a signal, a crew conspiracy taking shape in the shadows. Kyle hovered near the galley, his nervous eyes flicking between Tara and Nia, his hands twisting harder now. Tara's fake apology had been a feint, a pause before the real strike, and Nia's recording hadn't stopped her. It had lit a match. Victor's tweet was already pinging across the internet, a blurry shot of Nia's spilled bag racking up likes from strangers who'd never know her name. She clenched her fists, the towel cold now on her tray, and stared at the seat back ahead. She'd thought she'd won, thought she'd put Tara in check with that confrontation. But the game had shifted. What had Tara whispered to Kyle? What were they planning behind those galley curtains? Nia's victory felt hollow, a mirage dissolving in the jet's stale air. She'd stood her ground, sure, but Tara wasn't retreating. She was reloading. The cabin lights flickered as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a subtle tremor that mirrored the unease coiling in Nia's gut. She'd misjudged the depth of Tara's spite, the reach of her little kingdom. And now the crew was in on it. A pack closing ranks, Victor's phone glowed across the aisle, his smirk a silent taunt, and Tara's footsteps faded into the galley's hum, her next move already in motion. Nia's win had been a spark, not a shield, and the fire was about to roar. The Skylux jet cruised toward a refueling stop in Phoenix, its engines a steady growl beneath the cabin's amber glow, the air thick with the musk of leather and the faint tang of spilled champagne. Nia Jackson sat in her second-row seat, her crimson suit now a battle-worn badge, the coffee stain a ghost on her chest, her briefcase locked tight after Tara Hensley's accidental shove had spilled it into the aisle. The memory of Tara's fake apology and Kyle's nervous glances gnawed at her. The crew conspiracy from moments ago a dark cloud she couldn't shake. She'd thought she'd won a small victory by recording that confrontation, forcing Tara to back off. But Victor Grayson's tweeted photo of her scrambling in the aisle, captioned, "First-class trash," still burned in her mind, a public scar she couldn't erase. The cabin had settled into a restless hum. The oil tycoon dozed with his cigar stub smoldering. The pop star hummed to herself, earbuds in, and Victor tapped his loafer against the floor, his silver hair glinting as he scrolled his phone, no doubt reveling in the likes piling up. Nia's fingers brushed her smartwatch, its sleek face a quiet comfort, tracking her every move with cold precision. She'd outlasted Tara's petty jabs, she told herself, her jaw set as she stared at the seat back ahead, the jet descending. Now, the horizon tilting through the window. But Tara wasn't done. The flight attendant emerged from the galley, her bleach blonde bun pristine, her steps sharp and purposeful as she clutched a small velvet pouch in her hand, her lips twitching. With a secret she couldn't wait to unleash, she stopped at Victor's seat first, leaning in close, her voice a low murmur Nia couldn't catch, but Victor's nod and sly grin told her enough. Tara straightened, her eyes locking onto Nia with a predator's focus, and then she struck. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced, her voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "We've had an item reported missing. A very valuable watch." Heads snapped up, the tech mogul frowned, the pop star yanked out an earbud, the oil tycoon stirred with a grunt. Tara held up the pouch, dangling it like evidence in a courtroom, and turned to Nia. "I saw you near Mr. Grayson's seat earlier, Ms. Jackson. Mind if we check your things?" The accusation landed like a bomb, the cabin erupting in gasps and murmurs. Victor's chuckle a dark undercurrent as he leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Typical behavior," he said, loud enough for all to hear, his words a match to Tara's. "Flame." Nia's pulse spiked, her chest tightening, but she kept her face smooth, her voice steady. "I didn't take anything. Go ahead and look." Tara smirked, signaling Kyle, who scurried over with a nervous shuffle, his hands trembling as he hovered near Nia's seat. But before he could move, the jet's intercom crackled, and the captain's voice boomed. "Prepare for landing in Phoenix. Security will board for a routine check." Tara's smirk widened, a gleam of triumph in her eyes as she stepped back, letting the moment simmer. The plane touched down with a jolt, tires screeching on the tarmac, and within minutes, 2 burly security guards in Navy uniforms stormed aboard, their boots thumping the carpet. Tara pointed at Nia, her voice rising with feigned urgency. "She's the one. I saw her slip something from Mr. Grayson's tray." The guards loomed over Nia, one barking, "Stand up, ma'am. We need to search you." The cabin watched, a hungry audience as Nia rose, her movements calm, deliberate, her crimson suit a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around her. They patted her down, rough hands rifling her pockets, then tore into her briefcase, dumping her laptop, papers, and scarf onto the tray table in a messy heap. Victor leaned back, sipping his champagne, his typical, echoing in the silence as passengers craned their necks. Then it happened. The second guard pulled the velvet pouch from beneath Nia's seat cushion, holding it up like a trophy. "Found it," he said, his voice flat but damning. Tara gasped, her hand flying to her chest in mock horror. "I knew it," the oil tycoon muttered. "Unbelievable." The pop star snapped a photo, and Victor's grin stretched ear to ear. Nia's heart pounded, the setup so blatant it almost made her laugh, but she didn't flinch. She tapped her smartwatch, pulling up its log, her voice cutting through the din like ice. "Check the timestamp. I haven't moved from this seat since takeoff, except to confront her in the galley. Recorded it all." She held up her phone, the red dot still glowing from earlier, and played the clip. Tara's fake apology, her snide, "All better now," clear as day. The guards hesitated, exchanging glances, and the first one synced her watch to his tablet, his brow furrowing as the data confirmed her story. "She's right," he muttered, no movement near his seat. The cabin went still, Tara's smirk freezing, Victor's glass pausing mid-sip. Nia pressed her advantage, pointing at the pouch. "Someone planted that. I'd start with her." The guards turned to Tara, whose face flushed red, her hands balling into fists as she stammered, "That's ridiculous. She's lying." "But," the second guard shook his head, tucking the pouch into an evidence bag. "We'll sort this on the ground." "You're clear, ma'am." Nia nodded, sinking back into her seat, her briefcase repacked with a steady hand, a rush of triumph surging through her veins. She'd outsmarted them, turned Tara's trap into a noose around her own neck. The guards trudged off, the jets, engines winding down, and the passengers shifted uncomfortably, their stares now uncertain. Tara retreated to the galley, her heels clicking with a frantic edge, her plan unraveling in front of everyone. Nia let out a slow breath, her lips twitching into a faint, victorious smile. She'd won this round, she thought. Her smartwatch, a silent hero, her composure a shield against the chaos. Victor set his glass down with a clink, his grin fading to a scowl, and the oil tycoon coughed, avoiding her gaze. She'd beaten the accusation, exposed the lie, and walked away clean, or so she believed. As the jet's doors opened for refueling, Tara slipped into the galley, her hands shaking as she grabbed the radio, her voice a low hiss into the static. This isn't over. She's disruptive, a threat. Tell them. Kyle hovered behind her, his eyes wide, but he didn't stop her, his loyalty bought by fear. Nia didn't hear it, didn't see the way Tara's fury morphed into something colder, more calculated. She thought she'd dodged the bullet, that her evidence had shut Tara down for good. But the flight attendant's radio crackled with a response from Phoenix ground crew, a curt, "We'll handle it on arrival." Tara's lips curled into a new, darker smirk, her defeat only fuel for a bigger fire. Nia leaned back, her smartwatch ticking silently, oblivious to the trap tightening. Around her, she'd won the battle, sure, but Tara wasn't surrendering. She was escalating, and the next blow would strike deeper, harder, with a force Nia couldn't yet see. The jet's engines revved for takeoff, the cabin lights flickering, and the game shifted into a new, more dangerous gear. The Skylux jet roared back into the sky after its Phoenix refueling stop, climbing through thick clouds as turbulence rattled the cabin, the amber lights flickering like a storm brewing inside. Nia Jackson sat in her second-row seat, her crimson, suit creased but unbowed, her smartwatch still humming with the victory she'd snatched from Tara Hensley's false accusation. The planted watch had backfired, her recorded proof and steady nerve turning the security guards away empty-handed, leaving Tara fuming and Victor Grayson scowling across the aisle. She'd outsmarted them, she thought, her fingers brushing the locked briefcase beside her, the laptop and papers safe after the galley confrontation and the aisle spill. The cabin buzzed with unease now, the oil tycoon's snores replaced by restless shifting, the pop star's earbuds dangling as she stole glances, the tech mogul's tablet dark. Nia leaned back, her breath steady, believing she'd weathered Tara's storm, that her evidence had clipped the flight attendant's wings. But the air thickened, a sour edge cutting through the leather and champagne scent, and Victor's silver head tilted toward her, his loafers tapping a slow, menacing rhythm. He set his glass down with a deliberate clink, his voice rising above the engine's growl. "This flight's gone to hell," he said, loud enough to snap every head his way. "All because one person's ruining the vibe." His eyes locked on Nia, a glint of malice flashing as he leaned forward, his pinstripe suit rustling. "We paid for peace, not drama." The oil tycoon grunted awake, nodding. "Damn right," while the pop star smirked, her phone already out, filming the spark Victor had lit. Tara emerged from the galley, her bleach blonde bun catching the light, her smirk subtle but sharp as she hovered near the aisle, her presence a silent nudge. The cabin erupted. A woman in pearls slammed her tray table. "She's been a problem since takeoff." A man with a gold chain banged his fist, shouting, "Get her out of here!" The tech mogul joined in, his voice a low snarl. "No respect. For the rest of us." Nia's pulse spiked, her chest tightening as the chants grew, a chorus of slurs slicing through the air. "Troublemaker. Thief. Doesn't belong." She stood, her heels firm on the carpet, her crimson suit, a beacon amid the chaos, and raised her phone to record, her voice cutting through the din. "You're all on camera. Keep going." The threat slowed them, the oil tycoon hesitating, the pop star's filming hand wavering, but Victor doubled down, his grin feral. "She thinks she can scare us? Pathetic." Tara nodded from the sidelines, her eyes glinting as she mouthed something to Kyle, who scurried off, his nervous shuffle a stark contrast to her calm. The mob surged again, trays banging like war drums, a glass shattering as a passenger hurled it toward Naya, missing her head by inches. She ducked, her phone steady, her jaw set, refusing to crack under the onslaught. The intercom crackled, the captain's voice booming, "Enough! Sit down, all of you!" The command hit like a thunderclap, the cabin freezing mid-roar, passengers sinking back into their seats, Victor's smirk fading to a scowl, the oil tycoon muttering curses. Nia lowered her phone, her breath ragged but controlled, believing she'd survived the worst. Tara glided over, her hands clasped in mock concern, offering a fresh cup of water with a murmured, "Let's all calm down now." Nia took it, her eyes narrowing at the flight attendant's sudden sweetness, but she sipped anyway, the cool liquid of fleeting relief after the chaos. The cabin settled, the turbulence easing, the lights steadying, and Nia leaned back, her phone clutched tight. Footage of the mob, her new shield. She'd face them down, she thought, her defiance a quiet fire burning brighter. Victor stared out his window. The pop star plugged her earbuds back in, and Tara retreated to the galley, her heels clicking softer now. Naya's eyelids grew heavy, the adrenaline crash hitting hard, and she took another sip, the water oddly bitter on her tongue. She blinked, her vision blurring, her grip on the phone loosening as a fog rolled through her mind. What was happening? Her head lolled, her body slumping into the seat, and the last thing she saw was Tara's silhouette in the galley, a faint smirk curling her lips. Nia blacked out, the jet's hum fading to silence, her phone slipping to the floor with a soft thud. Hours later, she jolted awake, her mouth dry, her head pounding, the cabin lights harsh against her eyes. She groped for her phone, panic spiking as she unlocked it. The screen was blank. Every video, every photo, wiped clean. Her smartwatch beeped, its log intact but useless without the footage. Across the aisle, Victor swirled a fresh glass of champagne, his grin back in full force, while Tara passed by, her tray empty, her voice a low hum as she chatted with Kyle. "Good thing we cleaned up that mess," she said, just loud enough for Naya to hear. Nia's chest heaved, the realization crashing in. Tara had slipped something into her water, a sedative, and erased her proof while she was out. The mob's attack, her stand, all gone, leaving her defenseless. She'd thought she'd won. Thought. The captain's intervention and her recording had turned the tide, but Tara had struck back harder. Her counterattack a silent, ruthless gut punch. Victor's eyes met hers, his chuckle a dagger, and the cabin's hum returned, a mocking lullaby. To her defeat, she clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, the erased phone a dead weight in her lap. Tara wasn't just playing dirty, she was rewriting the game, and Naya's false victory had crumbled into a trap she hadn't seen coming. The Yana jet soared on, the Pacific stretching endless below, and Tara's smirk lingered in the shadows, her next move already ticking like a bomb. Hey, how wild was that mob scene? Comment number 1 if you think Nia should have fought back harder. Number 2 if her cool-headed filming was the smarter move. If Tara's sneaky sedative twist has you fuming, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stick with us for more jaw-dropping turns. What's Tara cooking up next after wiping Nia's phone? Will Victor's smug grin last much longer? Drop your predictions below, and let's unravel this mess together in the next part. The Skylux jet jolted through a pocket of turbulence, its amber-lit cabin shuddering as it descended toward an emergency landing in Denver, the captain's voice still ringing in Nia Jackson's ears from his intercom blast that had silenced the passenger mob hours ago. She slumped in her second-row seat, her crimson suit wrinkled and stained, her head pounding like a drum from the sedative Tara Hensley had slipped into her water, a bitter betrayal that had left her unconscious, and her phone wiped of every damning video. Her smartwatch ticked on her wrist, its log a lifeline of proof she couldn't yet use, the erased footage a gaping wound in her fight. She blinked hard, her vision swimming as the fog lifted, her tongue thick with the aftertaste of whatever Tara had dosed her with. Across the aisle, Victor Grayson swirled his champagne, his silver hair gleaming, his smirk a quiet taunt. While the oil tycoon snored again, the pop star scrolled her phone, and the tech mogul stared out the window, the mob's fury now a dull, Nia's fingers fumbled for her briefcase, her movements sluggish, and she pulled out a spare burner phone she'd stashed for emergencies. its screen a faint glow in the dim light. She'd thought she'd lost everything when she woke to that blank slate. But Tara's strike had lit a fire she couldn't douse. The jet hit the Denver tarmac with a screech, the captain announcing, "We're grounding due to a passenger disturbance." His tone clipped, a direct echo of the chaos Victor had incited. Naya dialed her lawyer, Marcus Reed, her voice hoarse, but steady as she whispered, "I've been drugged, framed, mobbed. Sue Skylux, now." Marcus's deep baritone crackled through, "I'm on it. Stay put. I'll get you out." She hung up, her pulse steadying, a flicker of triumph sparking through the haze. Tara emerged from the galley, her bleach blonde, bun slightly askew, her smirk faltering as she caught Nia's glare. The flight attendant's hands twitching like she knew the tide was shifting. The jet's doors hissed open, and the captain stormed down the aisle, his face a mask of fury, his finger jabbing at Tara. "You're confined to the galley until we sort this," he snapped, his voice a whip that made Kyle flinch behind her. Tara's jaw dropped, her protests swallowed by the captain's glare, and she slunk back, her heels dragging as Kyle followed, his nervous eyes darting to Naya. Ground crew swarmed aboard, escorting Naya off the plane, her crimson suit a beacon. As she stepped into the cool Denver night, her burner phone clutched tight. They led her to a private lounge, its glass walls overlooking the tarmac, the jet a sleek silhouette against the runway lights. She sank into a plush chair, her head clearing, Marcus's promise echoing in her mind. She'd turned the tables, she thought, her lips curving into a faint, fierce smile as she sipped a bottle of water from a crew member who didn't dare meet her eyes. Tara was grounded, the captain was on her side, and legal firepower was inbound. The passengers still on the jet glared through the windows, their earlier jeers now muted scowls, Victor's silver head a dark shape among them. Nia leaned back, her smartwatch beeping a low battery warning, but she didn't care. She'd won this round, she told herself, her groggy haze lifting into sharp resolve. She'd survived the mob, the sedative, the wipeout, and now Skylux would pay. The lounge's silence wrapped her like armor, the distant hum of planes a lullaby to her near triumph. But the victory was fragile. Victor Grayson wasn't on that jet by chance. He was a Skylux board member, a fact Nia didn't yet know, his influence a shadow stretching far beyond the cabin. He slipped a wad of cash to a ground crew lackey, his voice a low growl as he muttered, "Get the local cops. She caused the scene, not me." The lackey nodded, pocketing the bills, and within minutes, Denver police rolled up, their lights flashing red and blue across the tarmac. Nia watched from the lounge, her smile fading as two officers in stiff uniforms marched through the glass doors, their boots thudding on the tile. "Nia Jackson?" the taller one barked, his hand resting on his holster. "You're under detention for disturbing the peace." Her stomach dropped, the water bottle slipping from her fingers, splashing across the floor. "What? I was the victim," she said, her voice rising, but the second cop cut her off. "Witnesses say otherwise. Hands behind your back." She stood, her crimson suit catching the lounge's harsh light, and complied, the cold snap of cuffs biting her wrists, a cruel echo of the sedative's fog. They marched her out, past the jet where Tara peeked from the galley, her smirk reborn, and Victor leaned against a window, his grin a slash of triumph. Nia's head spun, the legal leverage she'd banked on dissolving into this new trap. Marcus's call had rattled Skylux, sure, but Victor's money moved faster, twisting her win into a cell. They shoved her into a squad car, the door slamming shut, the lounge's glass walls receding as the engine growled to life. She'd thought she'd turned the tide, thought Tara's confinement and the captain's fury had sealed her comeback, but Victor's reach had flipped the script. The cuffs dug into her skin, her smartwatch silent now, its battery dead, and the Denver skyline blurred past, a cold reminder of how far she'd fallen. Tara's smirk lingered in her mind, a taunt that this wasn't over, and Victor's cash had bought a counterattack she hadn't seen coming. The car rolled toward a holding cell, the night swallowing her triumph, and Nia clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening even as the bars loomed. She'd get out, she told herself. Marcus would fix this. But the game had shifted again, and the next blow would strike deeper than she could imagine. The jet sat silent on the tarmac, Tara's heels clicking faintly in the galley. Her radio, crackling with new plans, and Victor's shadow stretched long into the night, unyielding and unbroken. The Denver holding cell smelled of stale coffee and sweat, its gray walls pressing in on Nia Jackson as she sat on a metal bench, her crimson suit a crumpled relic of the Skylux jet's chaos, the cuffs from her arrest still chafing her wrists. Hours had crawled by since Victor Grayson's bribe landed her here, the police claiming she'd disturbed the peace despite her being the target of a mob, a sedative, and a wiped phone. Her burner phone buzzed in her pocket. Marcus Reed's voice cutting through the static. "They've got nothing solid, I'm springing you now." True to his word, the cell door clanged open, a gruff cop muttering, "You're free to go." His eyes avoiding hers as he handed back her briefcase, the smartwatch inside dead from its drained battery. Nia stood, her heels echoing on the concrete, her jaw set with a fire that hadn't dimmed despite the night's grind. She'd called Tara Hensley's bluff with that watch stunt, turned the captain against her, and now Marcus had yanked her from this trap. She stepped into the crisp Denver dawn, the jet long gone, replaced by a new Skylux flight to Los Angeles, her original destination. She boarded, her suit drawing stares from a fresh crop of elites, a biotech CEO in a turtleneck, a retired athlete with gold chains, a fashion influencer snapping selfies. Nia sank into a new seat, third row this time, her briefcase locked tight, believing she'd left Tara's venom behind in Denver. She was wrong. The cabin door clicked shut, and Tara strutted in, her bleach blonde bun pristine, her uniform crisp, reinstated by Victor's boardroom pull despite the captain's orders. Nia's stomach twisted, her pulse spiking as Tara's eyes locked onto her, a smirk curling her lips like a blade catching light. "Welcome back," Tara purred, her voice, loud enough to turn heads. "Hope you're ready to behave." The biotech CEO frowned, the athlete chuckled, and the influencer's camera swiveled toward Nia, sensing drama. The jet taxied, engines roaring, and Tara launched her next strike. Mid-flight, as the cabin settled into a hum of small talk and clinking glasses, she stormed down the aisle, her arm sporting a fresh purple bruise, her face a mask of outrage. "She attacked me!" Tara shouted, pointing at Nia, her voice cracking with fake tears. "Back in Denver before they took her away, she grabbed me." Nia's head snapped up, her chest tightening, the lie so absurd it almost choked her. "That's insane," she said, her tone steady, rising to her feet. "I was cuffed and escorted out. Check the logs." But Tara doubled down, spinning to the passengers, her eyes wide with crocodile tears. "She's dangerous. I'm scared. For all of us." The biotech CEO leaned forward, murmuring, "Unhinged." The athlete nodded. "I saw her type before," and the influencer zoomed in, whispering, "This is gold." Nia opened her mouth to protest, but Tara had already radioed the cockpit, her voice a shrill plea. "She's a threat, Captain." The jet shuddered, the intercom crackling as the new captain, a gruff replacement, barked, "Restrain her." Two crew members, burly guys in Skylux vests, stormed from the back, one snapping cuffs on Nia's wrists mid-flight, the cold steel a brutal déjà vu. They dragged her down the aisle, past jeering passengers, the athlete shouting, "Lock her! Up!" and the influencer filming every step, her giggles a soundtrack to Nia's humiliation. Tara trailed behind, her bruise a prop she flashed like a badge, her smirk hidden from the crew but searing into Nia's back. They shoved her into a jump seat near the galley, cuffs biting her skin, her crimson suit a crumpled banner of defiance. She glared at Tara, her voice low but sharp. "You won't get away with this." Tara leaned in, her breath hot against Nia's ear. "Oh, I already have." Nia's mind raced, her burner phone still in her pocket. Marcus a call away. But the cuffs pinned her hands. She'd beaten the watch frame up, she told herself. She could beat this. She shouted to the crew, "Check my record. She's got complaints stacked against her." The taller crew member hesitated, his brow furrowing, and darted to the cockpit, returning with a tablet. "She's right," he muttered, scrolling. "Hensley's got 3 priors for passenger disputes." Tara's face paled, her bruise suddenly less convincing, and the crew uncuffed Nia, their grumbles reluctant as they waved her back to her seat. She stood, her wrists red, her victory a jagged shard of hope as she strode past Tara, whose fists, clenched, her plan cracking. The passengers shifted, the biotech CEO coughing awkwardly, the athlete shrugging, the influencer pouting at the fizzled drama. Nia sank into her seat, her breath steadying, believing she'd flipped the script again, her truth cutting through Tara's lies. But Victor wasn't done. Across the aisle, his silver hair caught the light as he tapped his phone, a video uploading to the web. A doctored clip from Denver. Nia's release twisted to show her lunging at Tara, the bruise added in post, the audio dubbed with screams. "Violent thug disrupts Skylux flight," the caption read, and within minutes it exploded online, likes and retweets flooding in, a tidal wave of hate crashing over Nia's name. She didn't see it yet, her burner phone silent, but the cabin's air shifted, passengers sneaking glances, their whispers growing bolder. Tara caught wind, her smirk reborn as she leaned against the galley wall, her bruise a silent victory lap. Nia rubbed her wrists, her near triumph souring as the jet soared toward Los Angeles. The internet's roar a distant thunder she couldn't yet hear. She'd thought she'd won, thought the crew's retreat and Tara's priors had sealed her comeback, but Victor's video was a sledgehammer, smashing her reprieve into shards. The biotech CEO pulled out his phone, frowning at the clip. The athlete muttered, knew she was trouble. And the influencer's eyes widened, her next post already brewing. Nia's chest heaved, her smartwatch dead, her burner her only lifeline. But the cuff's sting lingered, a warning of how fast the tide could turn. Tara's heels clicked back to the galley, her radio buzzing with a new scheme, and Victor's fingers danced across his screen, his boardroom power flexing beyond the jet's walls. Nia's win had been a flicker, a breath before the plunge, and the next blow would hit with a force she couldn't dodge. The Skylux jet sliced through the night sky, its engines a low growl as it neared Los Angeles, the cabin lights casting a harsh glow over Nia Jackson's third-row seat, her crimson suit now a tattered flag of war after Tara Hensley's assault. Frame up and Victor Grayson's doctored video turned her into an online pariah. Her wrists still ached from the mid-flight cuffs, her burner phone buzzing faintly in her pocket with Marcus Reed's last message. "Hang tight, I'm boarding." At the next stop, she'd clawed back from that Denver cell, exposed Tara's priors to the crew, and thought she'd regained her footing. But Victor's viral clip, racking up millions of views, had painted her as a violent thug, the biotech CEO across the aisle, now eyeing her with suspicion, the athlete muttering slurs under his breath, the influencer's camera still hungry for more. Nia's chest tightened, the weight of the internet's hate pressing down, but she held her head high, her briefcase locked beside her, its dead smartwatch a silent casualty of the fight. The jet dipped toward a brief connecting stop in Las Vegas, the captain announcing, "We're picking up a passenger." His voice gruff from the earlier chaos. The doors hissed open, and Marcus strode aboard, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal suit, his bald head gleaming under the lights, his presence a lifeline Nia grabbed with both hands. He slid into the seat beside her, his deep voice a rumble as he muttered, "We're suing Skylux for everything. Discrimination, assault, defamation. I've got the papers ready." Nia's breath steadied, a rush of relief flooding her veins as Marcus pulled out a tablet, scrolling through legal docs, his plan sharp and relentless. "Tara's done," he said, "and Victor's board seat won't save him." The captain's intercom crackled again. "Ms. Hensley, you're grounded pending review." His tone final, and Tara's bleach blonde bun vanished into the galley, her heels clicking in retreat, Kyle trailing her with wide, panicked eyes. Nia's lips twitched into a fierce smile, her allies' firepower a balm to the bruises on her wrists, the erased footage, the mob's jeers. The passengers shifted, the biotech CEO coughing awkwardly, the athlete glaring but silent, the influencer pouting as her drama feed dried up. Marcus strategized, his voice low. "We hit them with the suit as soon as we land. You've got enough on that burner to back it up." Nia nodded, her burner phone a lifeline she'd clung to since Denver, its call logs and texts a threadbare shield against Victor's lies. The jet took off again, Los Angeles now an hour away. And Nia leaned back, her pulse slowing, believing she'd turned the tide. Marcus was her ace, Tara was sidelined, and the captain's order felt like justice inching closer. She'd survived, The sedative, the cuffs, the video, and now she had muscle in her corner. The cabin hummed, the lights steady, and she let herself breathe, her crimson suit a quiet testament to her grit. But the tide turned fast. Marcus's phone buzzed, a sharp trill that cut through their planning, and he answered, his brow furrowing. As a voice barked through the line, Nia caught snippets. Grayson's people, compromising photos, your career. Marcus's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the tablet harder, and he hung up, his eyes darting away from her. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp. But he didn't answer, his silence a crack in her armor. Minutes later, Tara re-emerged, her smirk reborn, her bruise faded but her swagger intact, Victor's influence overriding the captain's call. She strutted past Nia, her tray empty, her eyes glinting with a predator's glee, and Marcus shifted, beside her, his posture stiffening. "I can't do this," he muttered, his voice a low rasp. "They've got dirt on me. I'm out." Nia's stomach dropped, her ally's betrayal a knife in her ribs as Marcus stood, grabbing his tablet, his charcoal suit receding down the aisle without a backward glance. She lunged after him, her voice a hiss. "You can't leave me now!" But he didn't turn, his broad shoulders a wall slamming shut. Tara seized the moment, her heels clicking as she slipped a small baggie of white powder into the biotech CEO's hand, whispering, "Plant it. Grayson says so." The CEO hesitated, then nodded, his turtleneck rustling as he leaned across the aisle, dropping the drugs into Nia's open briefcase while she stared after Marcus, her focus shattered. The jet soared on, Los Angeles lights twinkling below, and Tara radioed the cockpit, her voice a shrill alarm. "She's got drugs. Check her bag." The captain's intercom boomed. "Crew, investigate." And the same burly guys from the assault frame-up stormed forward, their vests taut as they ripped open Nia's briefcase, the baggie tumbling out in plain view. "God, her," one growled, snapping cuffs on her wrists again, the steel a cruel refrain as they yanked her from her seat. The biotech CEO smirked, the athlete cheered. "Told you she's trouble," and the influencer's camera rolled, her gasps, a soundtrack to Nia's fall. Tara hovered, her smirk a silent victory, Victor's silver head nodding approval from his seat, his phone still glowing with the viral clip. Nia's chest heaved, her desperate comeback collapsing as Marcus vanished into the galley, his betrayal. A ghost she couldn't fight. She'd thought she'd won, thought Marcus's legal muscle and Tara's grounding had tipped the scales. But Victor's blackmail and Tara's plant had flipped it all. The cuffs dug in, sirens wailed faintly as the jet neared LAX, and Nia's burner buzzed uselessly in her pocket, her last lifeline slipping away. Tara's heels clicked a triumphant rhythm, her radio crackling with glee, and Victor's grin stretched wider, his boardroom claws tightening. Nia's fight flickered, her crimson suit a fading ember, and the next blow loomed like a storm on the horizon. "Wow, can you believe Marcus bailed like that?" Comment number 1, if you think Nia deserved a loyal ally. Number 2, if you'd have ditched her too under Victor's pressure. If this double cross has your blood boiling, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and stick around for the fallout. Did Tara's drug plant catch you off guard, or were you waiting for her to sink lower? How's Nia going to claw out of this, one with no one left in her corner? Drop your thoughts below and let's see where this wild ride crashes next. Rain lashed the Los Angeles tarmac as the Skylux jet touched down, its engines winding down into a low whine. The cabin lights stark against the night as Nia Jackson sat cuffed in the jump seat near the galley, her crimson suit soaked with sweat. And defeat after Tara Hensley's drug plant, and Marcus Reed's gut punch betrayal. The baggie of white powder, slipped into her briefcase by the biotech CEO under Victor Grayson's orders, glinted under the crew's flashlight, a fabricated nail in her coffin that had snapped the cuffs back on her wrists mid-flight. Her burner phone buzzed faintly in her pocket, useless with her hands bound, her dead smartwatch a mute witness to the spiral that had started with a spilled coffee, and now ended here, in this rain-soaked hell. The biotech CEO smirked from his seat. The athlete flexed his gold-chain neck with a grunt of approval. The influencer filmed her disgrace, her giggles a cruel echo of the mob's jeers from hours ago. Tara strutted past, her bleach-blonde bun catching the light, her smirk a razor's edge as she leaned into the crew. "Told you she's trouble." The jet's doors hissed open, and LAPD officers stormed aboard, their boots squelching on the wet carpet, rain dripping from their caps as they hauled Nia to her feet, the cuffs biting deeper. "Nia Jackson, you're under arrest for possession," the lead cop barked, his voice flat, his partner grabbing her briefcase as evidence, the baggie dangling like a trophy. She stumbled down the aisle, her heels slipping, the passengers' stares a gauntlet of disdain. The biotech CEO nodded. "About time," the athlete sneered. "Jail's where she belongs." The influencer zoomed in. "This is live." Tara stood at the door, her smirk widening as rain streaked her uniform. A silent victory lap as Nia was dragged into the storm, the cuffs a cold echo of Denver's trap. The squad car waited, its lights flashing red and blue through the downpour, and they shoved her inside, the door slamming shut. The biotech CEO's turtleneck a blur through the jet's window as Victor's silver hair glinted, his grin a shadow of triumph. Nia's chest heaved, her breath fogging the glass, Marcus's betrayal a fresh wound, Tara's plant a masterstroke she hadn't dodged. She'd thought she'd hit bottom in that Denver cell, but this was lower, a total collapse. Of every stand she'd taken, the watch, the mob, the assault lie, all erased by this fabricated bust. The car rolled toward the station, rain hammering the roof, and Nia's mind raced, her burner her last thread, but the cuffs pinned her. Then a flicker of hope broke through. Kyle, the junior attendant, his nervous eyes haunting her memory, darted from the jet, his apron flapping as he flagged the cops, his voice a shaky yell over the storm. "Wait, she didn't do it!" The car screeched to a halt, the lead cop twisting around. "What's that?" Kyle stumbled closer, rain soaking his wiry frame, his hands wringing as he stammered. "Tara made me help. She planted it. I saw her give it to the guy in the turtleneck." Nia's heart leapt, her breath catching as the cop's partner radioed it in, his brow furrowing. "You're sure?" he pressed, and Kyle nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I can't lie anymore. She's got me scared, but this is wrong." The cops exchanged glances, the lead one muttering, "Check it out." And they hauled Nia back to the jet, her cuffs clinking, Tara's smirk faltering as Kyle pointed at her. "It was her." The biotech CEO shifted, his turtleneck suddenly tight, the athlete's bravado fading, the influencer's camera dipping. The cops grilled Kyle, his confession spilling fast. Tara's whispers, the baggie's handoff, Victor's nod from the sidelines. They uncuffed Nia, her wrists raw, and handed back her briefcase, the lead cop grumbling, "You're clear, ma'am. We'll deal with them." Nia stood in the rain, her crimson suit dripping, a rush of relief surging through her as Tara's face drained of color, her heels rooted to the tarmac, Victor's grin twitching into a scowl. She'd won, she thought, her breath steadying, Kyle's guilt, her unexpected lifeline. The cops turned to Tara, their voices sharp. "You're coming, with us?" But she stayed silent, her smirk gone, Kyle's betrayal a crack in her armor. Nia grabbed her burner, dialing Marcus despite his exit, her voice a hiss. "You owe me." But he didn't pick up, his absence a lingering sting. She stepped away from the jet, the rain a cold baptism, believing she'd clawed out of the abyss. The passengers dispersed, the biotech CEO slinking off, the athlete muttering, the influencer's live feed cut short. But Victor wasn't finished. As Nia crossed the tarmac toward the terminal, her heels clicking through puddles, a figure loomed. From the shadows, a wiry man in a black hoodie, his knife flashing in the rain. He lunged, the blade slicing toward her ribs, a hitman sent by Victor's boardroom wrath, his cash buying more than cops this time. Nia twisted, her reflexes sharp despite the night's toll, the knife grazing her suit, tearing fabric but missing flesh by inches. She stumbled back, her briefcase swinging as a shield, the man cursing as he lunged again, rain blurring his face. She dodged, her heel catching a grate, and kicked out, her shoe slamming his shin, sending him sprawling into a puddle. Airport. Security swarmed, shouts cutting through the storm, tackling the hitman as Nia backed away, her chest heaving, the rain washing blood from a shallow nick on her arm. The cops raced over, their lights flashing, and hauled the man up, his knife clattering to the ground, Victor's name spilling from his lips in a panicked plea. He paid me. Nia stood, drenched and shaking, her crimson suit torn. Her victory a fleeting gasp before this near-fatal strike. Tara watched from the jet's door, her arrest paused by the chaos, her smirk twitching back. Victor's silver head vanishing into the terminal, his hit a miss, but his intent clear. Nia's burner buzzed, ignored in her pocket, her total collapse, averted by Kyle's confession. But Victor's claws had drawn blood. She'd thought she'd won, thought the release had ended it. But this ambush was a brutal reminder. The war wasn't over, and the next fight would hit harder than she could. Brace for. Midnight cloaked Los Angeles in a restless hush as Nia Jackson stormed through the glass doors of Skylux headquarters, her crimson suit torn and rain-soaked from the tarmac hitman's knife. A shallow nick on her arm throbbing beneath a hasty bandage, her heels clicking a war drum on the marble floor. The tower loomed above, its sleek lines glowing against the night sky, a monument to the airline's wealth and the battleground for her final stand after a flight turned nightmare. Coffee spills, mob jeers, sedative wipes, drug plants, and now, a blade in the dark. Her burner phone buzzed in her pocket, ignored since Kyle's confession had sprung her from that drug arrest. The hitman's "Victor paid me" still ringing in her ears as security hauled him off. Her briefcase swung in her grip, the dead smartwatch inside a relic of her fight. But she didn't need it now. She had the truth, a weapon sharper than any knife. The lobby was deserted, save for a lone guard who jolted upright at her approach, his hand hovering over his radio until she flashed her badge, a sleek black card with gold lettering. Nia Jackson, Chief of Aviation Ethics and Inclusion. His eyes widened, his stammered "ma'am," trailing her as she bypassed the desk, heading straight for the executive elevators, her crimson suit a blood-red streak against the sterile white walls. She'd kept her role covert, a shadow operative, hired by Skylux's CEO to test the airline's underbelly. And tonight that shadow became a storm. The elevator hummed to the 30th floor, the boardroom's glass walls reflecting the city's sprawl. And Nia burst in, her voice a thunderclap as she faced the night shift execs, a trio of suits who froze mid-conversation. Tara Hensley's, fired, effective now, she declared, slamming her badge on the table, its thud echoing like a gavel. She drugged me, framed me, incited a mob. And Victor Grayson? Suspended from the board. He bribed cops, planted drugs, sent a hitman. The execs gaped, papers scattering as one stammered. "You're the ethics chief?" Nia nodded, her eyes blazing. "Undercover for a year, testing your rot. Tonight's my report." She pulled, her burner, playing Kyle's shaky confession, the hitman's plea, every scrap she'd clung to since takeoff, her crimson suit a testament to the war she'd fought. The execs scrambled, phones buzzing as they dialed security, HR, legal, Tara's termination papers drafted in minutes, Victor's board access revoked with a keystroke. Nia stood tall, her breath steadying, a rush of triumph surging through her as the tower's machinery whirred to life, purging the villains who'd thought her prey. Tara was done, her bleach blonde reign ended, and Victor's silver-haired empire cracked, his suspension a public fall she'd savor. The execs nodded, one muttering, "We'll clean this up." And Nia smirked, her near-death dodge on the tarmac now a blade she'd turned back on them. She'd won, she thought, her ethics role a trump card they'd never seen coming. The boardroom her courtroom, her verdict final. But Victor wasn't out. Downstairs, in a shadowed IT room, his loafers paced the tile, his pinstripe suit rumpled as he barked at a trembling tech. "Hack the system, now!" The tech's fingers flew, sweat beading on his brow as he breached Skylux's servers, Victor's cash a gun to his head. "Frame her for embezzlement," Victor growled. "Millions missing, pinned on Jackson." The screen flickered, files, shifting, Nia's name tied to fake transfers, a digital noose tightening as the execs upstairs buzzed with her victory. The tech hit enter, the hack live, and Victor's grin returned, a feral slash as he slipped out, his board suspension a hiccup he'd bury under this lie. Back in the boardroom, Nia's burner beeped, a security alert flashing, system breach detected. The execs froze, one pulling up the finance logs, his voice shaking. She's stolen 20 million? Nia's stomach dropped, her triumph shattering as the screen glowed with her name, her photo, her badge number. A fabricated theft so vast it dwarfed Tara's games. "That's impossible," she snapped, lunging for the tablet. But the execs recoiled, their trust flipping to fear, one dialing security. "Get her out!" Boots thudded up the stairs, guards bursting in, their hands rough as they grabbed her arms, her crimson suit twisting in their grip. "I didn't do this," she shouted, her voice raw. But the execs turned away, the hacked logs a guillotine she couldn't dodge. They dragged her down the elevator, her heels scraping, her badge snatched, her access revoked. The tower's ice snow, glass walls mocking her fall. Victor's hack had struck, his last stand a masterstroke that flipped her win into ruin. Her ethics roll a crown they'd ripped off her head. She hit the lobby, the guard averting his eyes as they shoved her into the rain, her briefcase tumbling after her, the burner buzzing with Marcus's unanswered call, a ghost she couldn't reach. Tara's firing, Victor's suspension, all dust now, her triumph a mirage erased by this digital dagger. The execs scrambled upstairs, legal on speed dial, believing her a thief, her year of work a lie in their eyes. Nia stood, drenched and defiant, her crimson suit a shredded banner, the nick on her arm pulsing as she snatched her briefcase, her smirk flickering back. Victor thought he'd won, his hack a checkmate, but she had one card left, a play he'd never see. The rain pounded, the tower glowed, and Tara's shadow lingered in her mind, her firing a hollow win against this new abyss. Victor's last stand had crushed her, but the game wasn't over, and the next move would burn brighter than he could brace for. Rain streaked the streets of downtown Los Angeles as Nia Jackson stood outside Skylux headquarters, her crimson suit a soaked and torn relic of the war she'd fought, her arm's shallow nick pulsing beneath its bandage, her briefcase clutched, tight after Victor Grayson's hack had framed her for embezzlement and security had thrown her out into the night. The tower's glass facade loomed behind her, a glowing tomb of her shattered triumph. Tara Hensley's firing and Victor's suspension undone by that digital lie pinning $20 million in theft on her name. Her burner phone buzzed in her pocket, its battery low but alive, a lifeline she'd clung to since the coffee spill. The mob, the drugs, the hitman, and now this. She'd lost Marcus, her badge, her footing, but not her fight. She dialed a contact, a gritty journalist named Lena Cruz she'd met years ago, her voice a low rasp as she said, "I've got footage, confessions, everything. Skylux tried to bury me, blow it wide open." Lena's reply crackled through, "Send it now." And Nia uploaded it all. Kyle's shaky tarmac confession, the hitman's "Victor paid me," snippets from her wiped phone she'd backed up to a cloud, her burner's call logs with Marcus, every scrap of the flight's hell. She hit send, her breath fogging in the rain, and within hours, Lena's outlet unleashed it online. Headlines screaming, "Skylux ethics chief framed, attacked, drugged, exposes airline's rot." The internet erupted, hashtags trending, millions of views piling up, clips of Nia's cuffed disgrace flipped into a rallying cry as the public roared, "Justice for Nia!" Protesters swarmed LAX, chants echoing through the terminals, news vans clogging downtown, cameras flashing as Skylux's stock tanked, its boardroom a war zone of panic. Nia watched from a diner across the street, her crimson suit drying under the heater, her burner buzzing with Lena's update. "They're crumbling. You're back in." By dawn, Skylux execs caved, the hacked embezzlement traced to an IT breach, Victor's fingerprints all over it, and they stormed the tower's lobby, reinstating Nia with a groveling, "We were wrong." She strode back in, her heels a steady beat on the marble, her badge restored, her ethics roll a crown they couldn't snatch again, the execs bowing as she demanded, "Clean it all out, now." The crowd outside cheered, horns blaring, the biotech CEO's turtleneck a ghost in her memory, the athlete's jeers drowned by the uproar, the influencer's feed now praising her grit. Nia stood at the boardroom window, the city sprawled below, her reinstatement a hard-won blaze, believing she'd turned the tide for good. Tara's firing stuck, Victor's suspension held, and the public's fury was her shield. She'd won, she thought, her chest swelling with a victory that felt final, the rain easing as sunlight broke through. But Tara wasn't done. The press conference erupted into chaos as a black SUV screeched up, tires smoking, and Tara leapt out, her bleach blonde, hair wild, her uniform swapped for a leather jacket, a pistol gleaming in her hand. She stormed the podium, her voice a shriek over the crowd. "Standards matter! She doesn't belong!" Reporters screamed, security lunged, and Nia spun, her instincts sharp despite the night's toll. Her crimson suit a target as Tara fired, the bullet whizzing past her shoulder, shattering a window. Glass rained, the crowd scattered, and Nia dove, her briefcase swinging as she tackled Tara, her hands clawing for the gun. They rolled across the pavement, rain-soaked and feral, Tara's nails raking Nia's face, her screams a mad howl. "You ruined me!" Nia twisted, her elbow slamming Tara's wrist, the pistol skittering free, security pouncing to cuff the ex-flight attendant as she thrashed, her eyes wild with a rage that wouldn't die. Nia staggered up, her suit ripped anew, blood trickling from a scratch, her breath ragged but unbroken. Thinking it was over, Tara's last gasp snuffed out. The crowd roared approval, cameras flashing, Skylux execs rushing to her side. "You're safe now." She nodded, her reinstatement solid, Tara's gun a final failed stand, her firing cemented in cuffs. But Victor had one more card. As Nia steadied herself, the tower's speakers crackled, a hacked feed blasting his voice across the chaos, a confession he'd meant to bury. "I paid the hitman, bribed the cops, hacked the system. She's too good. Had to stop her." The audio cut, static hissing, but the damage was done. The crowd gasping, reporters scrambling, execs paling as Victor's own words torched his empire. Nia froze, her chest heaving, the unexpected flip a sledgehammer to her foes. Victor's arrogance his undoing, his boardroom claws snapping under his own weight. She'd thought Tara's crash was the end, her gun the final blow. But this hacked. Truth was a wildfire, igniting a bigger storm she hadn't planned. Security dragged Tara away, her screams fading, the execs stammering, "We'll investigate." But Nia's smirk flickered, her crimson suit a battered crown, the public's roar a tide she'd ride. Victor's confession wasn't her move, but it was her win, a brutal twist that left Tara jailed, his suspension a stepping stone to ruin, and the next fight looming larger than she'd braced for. Dawn painted the Los Angeles skyline in streaks of gold as Nia Jackson stood in the Skylux boardroom, her crimson suit a shredded testament to the war she'd won, its torn fabric and faint coffee stain a badge of every battle. The hangar shaming, the mob's jeers, the sedative wipe, the drug plant, the hitman's knife, and Victor Grayson's hacked embezzlement frame. Glass shards from Tara Hensley's press conference gunshot crunched under her heels, her arms nicked scabbed over, her briefcase resting on the table, its dead smartwatch a silent relic beside her buzzing burner phone. The tower hummed with chaos below, protesters chanting her name, news helicopters buzzing, the fallout from Tara's armed crash and Victor's leaked confession still rippling through the city. Skylux execs flanked her, their suits rumpled, their faces pale as they pored over the hacked logs, Lena Cruz's exposé, Kyle's testimony, and the hitman's plea, every piece clearing Nia's name with a finality that silenced their earlier doubt. "You're exonerated," one stammered, handing back her badge, its gold lettering glinting, Chief of Aviation Ethics and Inclusion. Tara was gone, hauled off in cuffs after her gun-waving meltdown. Her bleach blonde reign ended in a May jail cell, her screams of standards now a mad echo. Victor faced worse, his confession, hacked into the tower's speakers by a panicked IT lackey he'd bullied, nailing him with bribery, assault, and fraud, an indictment filed as cops raided his penthouse, his silver-haired empire crumbling, under his own words. Nia's chest swelled, her breath steadying, the public's roar outside a tide she'd turned, her reinstatement a crown she'd forged in fire. She'd thought this was the end, her ethics role a sledgehammer that smashed. Tara and Victor, her victory a beacon for every slight she'd endured. The execs nodded, one muttering, "We'll rebuild trust." But Nia's eyes narrowed, her voice a blade as she said, "Not with you." She stepped forward, her heels firm, and dropped the bomb they'd never seen coming. "I'm not just the ethics chief," she said, her tone low, lethal. "I'm Jonathan Pierce's daughter, CEO's blood, groomed in secret to take this throne. The room froze, jaws dropping, paper slipping from hands as the execs gaped, their world tilting under her words. Jonathan Pierce, Skylux's elusive CEO, had planted her undercover, his black daughter a shadow heir testing the airline's soul, her flight a crucible to expose its rot. "He's retiring," she continued, "and I'm stepping in. You're all fired." The exec stammered, "What?" "Impossible." But Nia pulled her burner, playing a recorded call from Jonathan, his gravelly voice confirming, "She's my legacy." "Clean house, Nia." The boardroom erupted, protests drowning in the thud of her briefcase as she slammed it shut, security flooding in at her nod, dragging the suits out, their ties flapping, their pleas ignored. She'd purged the board, her crimson suit a regal shroud as she took the CEO's chair, the city sprawling below, her triumph a blaze that rewrote Skylux's future. Tara's jail cell clanged shut miles away, her firing a footnote, Victor's indictment a headline, his penthouse dark as cuffs snapped on his wrists, his hacked confession a noose he'd tied himself. Nia leaned back, her arms nick a faint sting, her eyes tracing the horizon, believing she'd won it all, the flight, the frame-ups, the knife, the tower, now hers to reshape. The exec's footsteps faded, security locking the doors, the boardroom hers alone, a kingdom reclaimed from the ashes of their hate. She'd dismantled the system that birthed Tara's venom and Victor's claws, her secret lineage a twist that flipped every slight into power, her father's trust a legacy she'd wield with iron. The dawn brightened, the protesters' chants, softening into cheers, news vans blaring her name, Skylux's stock steadying under her shadow. She'd thought it was over, her enemies buried, her reign secure. But then her burner pinged, a cryptic email flashing on the screen. "Victor's allies are watching. This isn't the end." No sender, no trace, just a chill that snaked down her spine, her smirk faltering as she stared at the words. Tara was locked up. Victor was toast. The board was gutted. But this shadow lingered. A whisper of a bigger fight. A cabal she hadn't unmasked. Nia's fingers tightened on the phone, her crimson suit catching the sunrise, its gold light a mirror to her resolve. She'd won the war, sure. Her daughter reveal a thunderbolt that shattered the old guard, her purge a clean slate. But this email was a spark, a hint of battles beyond the tower's glass. She stood, her heels clicking to the window, the city hers to hold, her father's voice a ghost in her ear. Clean house. And now a new threat loomed. Unseen, unyielding. Tara's jail bars wouldn't stop it. Victor's cuffs wouldn't silence it, and Nia's triumph, hard as steel, faced a shadow she couldn't yet name. Nia Jackson's journey in this gripping tale offers profound lessons about resilience, systemic bias, and the power of truth. First, her unrelenting grit shines as a beacon. Despite relentless attacks, coffee spills, mob hostility, false arrests, and a near-fatal hit, she never crumbled. This teaches us that inner strength can outlast even the ugliest storms of prejudice. Second, the story exposes how racism festers in unchecked systems, from Tara's petty cruelty to Victor's boardroom corruption, showing that silence or complicity fuels injustice. Nia's fight wasn't just personal, it was a war against a machine that thrives on exclusion. Third, her clever use of technology, smartwatch logs, burner phone backups, highlights the importance of evidence in dismantling lies, a reminder to document and stand firm when the odds stack against you. Fourth, the twist of her being the CEO's daughter underscores that power can hide in unexpected places, urging us to question assumptions about who holds authority. Finally, the cryptic email at the end warns that victory isn't final. New battles loom, teaching vigilance even in triumph. Nia's story isn't just a win, it's a call to confront bias head-on, to wield truth as a weapon, and to reshape broken systems with unwavering resolve. So what's the takeaway? Racism doesn't vanish with one fight. It demands constant pushback, and we all have a role in that war. How would you have faced Tara's venom or Victor's schemes? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Hit like if Nia's grit fired you up. Subscribe for more tales of defiance and share to spread the word. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with us. Here's to smashing ceilings and building a world where justice doesn't need a disguise.